Hi guys, it's day 9. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about schema therapy. It's something that I've brought up before, and a couple of people have expressed an interest. It's not very well known. I think it's a relatively new therapy technique. But yeah, I'm just going to give you like a brief overview of what my own experience of it is. I'm no expert by any means, not at all. I'm no psychologist. I haven't studied it in depth or anything like that. I only know I had 2 months of schema therapy at the beginning of the year, and I find the concept and kind of like the detail behind it and the psychology behind it was really interesting. And reading into it for my own sake, I kind of saw various parallels with my own experience and thought, well, yeah, that makes sense to me. That's good. That's what I want. The only reason I stopped with the schema therapy is the therapist and I, we couldn't work together, and it happens sometimes. I've spoken about it before. You've got to be able to kind of be open and honest and have that relationship with your therapist that where you can tell them anything that's going on in your head. With this particular therapist, he relied a lot on visualization techniques, so he would ask me to imagine myself in various scenarios and situations. He did a lot of kind of child work where he'd be like, can you imagine yourself at X age? What are you like? How do you feel? Stuff like that. And I just, like, he would literally say, imagine your 6-year-old self is sitting in that chair right there. What would you say to them? How would you treat them? Blah, 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 blah. It's an interesting technique, and I'm sure it works for lots of people, but I just couldn't get my head around it. I just couldn't put myself in that position where I could interact with my 6-year-old self on a one-to-one level. It just doesn't compute for me. I don't know if maybe I didn't give it enough of a chance or I didn't try hard enough, but ultimately it kind of got to the point where I was pretending that I could do these things just so I didn't upset the therapist. And that's a schema right there. I'm going to get into schemas in more detail now, but that's a prime example. That's a self-sacrificing schema. So what I'm doing there is I'm putting his needs ahead of my own. So I'm saying to myself, well, I'm going to pretend that I can do what he's asking me to do, even though I can't, because I don't want him to feel bad that I failed at doing something he wants me to do. So I'm going to pretend that I can do it and just carry on. And that's kind of one of my biggest emotional schemas that I've developed over the years, and it's something I do in life all the time. So what is an emotional schema? Let's go back to the beginning. So when you're a baby, you're a pretty basic machine. When you're first born, all your emotion, like, you don't really have any emotional needs. You've got like physical needs, so you need to like eat, sleep, excrete. That's pretty much it. There's nothing more complex about a baby. And it's only when you start to get older, I think from 2 onwards, that you start to develop kind of emotionally, and you start to rely on the people around you. So, your immediate family, your caregivers, your parents, your siblings, your close family. And you start sucking up all this information that's going on around you. And that's what you use to kind of base your own beliefs about yourself and your place in the world. Like, what kind of person are you and what kind of person are you going to be? That's all basic programming that's going on while you're at a very early age, which is why it's really important that that kind of input should always be positive. It should always be kind of encouraging or nurturing, because think of your brain like a computer. If you're building a computer and you start off by putting in bad input, bad data, then obviously as time progresses, you're basing everything that you do on that computer on bad information, so it's always going to be bad. So if you don't start very, very early on, like inputting this good data into the brain, you're going to develop these like negative core beliefs. And negative core beliefs are like your hardwired, your definitive kind of, this is what I believe about myself, this is what I believe about the world around me. And all that information comes from the people around you to begin with. Then obviously as you get older, your sphere of influence increases, and it's about, your friends and teachers and the books that you read, the TV shows and movies you watch, stuff like that. That all kind of informs your worldview a bit more. The media is a prime example. So by the time you're about 7 or 8, that's when your core personality is really developed, and it doesn't change much past that unless you actually start to have a lot of work around that later on in life. So yeah, 7 or 8 onwards, you're stuck. You're thinking, well, this is what I believe about the world around me based on what I've observed, what I've been told, how I've been treated. So let's look at an example of like a child who's born into a stable environment. So it's just like, a really happy family life. Its physical needs are met, its emotional needs are met, nurtured, developed, matured into adulthood. That child's going to grow up and be hopefully a happy, stable person who doesn't have any kind of personality issues or, dysfunctions or anything like that. Obviously, during the course of that person's life, things could happen to them, like outside stress, like bereavements or accidents or, serious injuries, things like that, that are going to affect their mental state. But basically, they're going to be stable emotionally going forward. You look at the opposite of that. So you look at a child that's born into dysfunction. So whether it's the family unit itself or the environment around it, I'm talking about kids that are born into war zones and things like that. In some instances, their physical needs aren't being met and their emotional needs aren't being met. And because of that, they're kind of stunted. They don't know how to develop, basically. So what happens is they start to kind of develop their own ways of coping with, the bad things that are going on around them because nobody else is helping them cope with the bad things around them. So the brain kind of kicks in and says, well, we need to sort this out. A prime example of like an early... So schemas, I'll talk about schemas. Schemas are basically maladaptive coping mechanisms. And when I say maladaptive, that means they're unhealthy. They're not good for you. In the short term, they do provide some relief. So you might think, well, they're worth having because they help. Short term, yeah, maybe they do. Long term, they're not really good for you to continuously go back and back and back on the same negative, maladaptive, coping mechanism. So they cause all sorts of problems later on in life. So they cause personality disorders, depression, anxiety, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar. You can trace a lot of those back to, the maladaptive schemas being developed at a very early age. So a prime example of a schema at that age is disassociation. The emotional need of feeling safe, that's a basic need that we all have. We all need that need to be met. Otherwise, we're going to be anxious about the world around us. We're not going to understand the dangers that are out there. When you're a child and that emotional need is not met, it's not developed, you're not told or nurtured that you're safe, you're going to feel unsafe, basically. Makes sense. And because you're feeling unsafe and no one's telling you how not to feel unsafe, you develop your own methods of feeling feeling safe. So in that instance, you would cut yourself off emotionally from the situations that are going on around you. You disassociate, you disconnect, you become withdrawn. And that happens a lot with children who are in dysfunctional family units, dysfunctional, environments. It's a very common emotional maladaptive coping mechanism. In the short term, it works because it cuts you off from the traumas that are going on at the time. Long term, it doesn't. It doesn't work. It's simple as that. When I first started doing the Schema Therapy, I had to fill out a questionnaire, and I think you can find it online. My therapist told me this. It was basically like loads of questions, 5 pages full of questions, all about how you view yourself, how you interact with other people, situations in your life. It was really in depth, and what that did, it kind of calculated my emotional landscape and what it was like in terms of schemas. And I think they've identified maybe 18 of these schemas. 18 distinct schemas that people generally will show over and over and over and over again. And my emotional landscape, straight away, I said yes, 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 yes. All those ones that's telling me I do have those schemas. So, like I've said before, the self-sacrifice schema, I always put my other people's needs ahead of my own. And that's quite common. I do that all the time. And people might say, well, that's a good thing, isn't it? You're doing something nice for somebody else. But ultimately, it's not, because it's coming from a negative place. It's not you're not doing it for altruistic or charitable means. You're doing it because basically you don't feel that you're good enough, that your needs don't matter. So you're going to put everyone else's needs ahead of your own, at the expense of your own, in most circumstances. So while on the face of it, that looks like it could be a good thing, the self-sacrifice, long term it's not, because you're constantly telling yourself that you're not good enough, that your needs don't matter, and they certainly don't matter as much as anybody else's. The funny thing about that one is, if you can work on that schema and recognize and make sure your own needs are met first, that puts you in a so much more stable position to then help people around you. So ultimately, it's kind of like, although initially the self-sacrificing schema, it's got this like benefit of helping other people. If you can develop it and kind of get rid of that schema, look after your own needs before everyone else's, make sure your needs are met, that makes you a more stable person, so that then you are better able and more emotionally stable to help the people around you. So everyone wins in that situation. So that's an example of one of the schemas I've got, big time. It's really hard to deal with, but these things you've got to be mindful. Everything that I'm talking about, it's not easy. It's not like I'm going to be able to tell you the answers to all the things that you want to know. I can't do that. You probably can't do that. It's work. You're always having to work at these things. It's always being mindful. It's mindful of how you're feeling. It's mindful of what's going on around you. It's being mindful of all these things and then making an effort to change them. So another schema that I have is the disassociation schema. I do tend to cut myself emotionally from things, and that means, like, for me, I don't have the same depth of emotion for anything anymore. I'm kind of at a general sense of numbness, so I can enjoy things, and on the face of it I can kind of get into experiences and find them pleasurable, or I can be happy, but ultimately I don't have that same kind of emotional feeling that an emotionally stable person would. Somebody who can be fully 100% in an experience. I've never had that. I've always kind of like looked back and thought I should have enjoyed that more. Again, I should. Forget that. But that's one of the problems I'm working on at the moment, is the disassociation, the self-sacrificing. The other one that I have big time is the self-critical punitive schema, which is when you're young and you feel like you're being neglected, you turn it inwards and you say to yourself, well, the reason that people are neglecting my needs is because I'm not worth anything, and you convince yourself that's true, and you spend your whole life just saying, well, why should I bother, living my life because I'm not worth it? Why should people bother wanting to help me because I'm just, I'm not worth the effort? And you convince yourself over time. It's like I was talking about yesterday, these negative thought processes just kind of create habits, negative thought habits, just going on and round and round and round. So yeah, that's an example just of a few of the schemas that I have. And like I say, there are 18. There are others, I don't know them offhand, but those are the three that I know firsthand, from my own experience. And like I say, it's a process. It's something that I kind of live with every day, trying to be mindful of how I feel, why I feel that way. Is it true? You've got to ask yourself a lot, is that true? That voice, the punitive voice in your head, that's my biggest issue. So that one that tells you, like, you're not good enough, don't bother trying to do anything because you're going to fail. It's always being able to step back and say, is that true? Is what that voice is saying, is it really true? Or, is it just bullshit? Like 10 times out of 10 it's bullshit, probably. But like I said, it's not easy. It is a gradual process, and like I said yesterday, forming new positive habits takes time. It takes time and effort, and commitment, but ultimately it's got to be worth it, right? Because who wants to be miserable, and who wants to have these maladaptive? No one wants to be maladaptive. That just sounds awful. So I'm going to leave it there. It's just a brief overview on Schema Therapy. If you want to know more, I'm going to put a link in the description below, just of maybe a link to Wikipedia, just so you can get like more of the basic. I haven't really gone into much detail because I only know from my own experience what I took from it, so I've tried to give you that. But even just a simple Google search, if you want to look into Schema Therapy a bit more, it's more for maybe like going back to the beginning, where we've developed our thinking patterns as children. It's kind of focusing on that aspect of our lives where these negative things have impacted us at an early age, and we've kind of grown to believe them to be true right through our lives until we've kind of like we're banging our heads against the wall. But yeah, I'll leave it there for now. I hope you find it interesting, and always that you get something out of these videos. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. So have a nice day.